Good afternoon and welcome. My name's Nick Thurlbeck and I'm the Chair of Commerce Ballarat. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. Today, most of us will be joining from the land of the Wadawurrung people, and I wish to acknowledge them as traditional owners. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Welcome and thanks for joining us today. Thank you to Federation Business School and all of our sector sponsors of Connect, Evolve, Recover 2020. Before I introduce our panel members, I just want to make you aware that there will be a Q&A component to this session. So from right now, you can start posting your questions and we will attempt to source the answers for you throughout this session. So for those who haven't used Zoom too often, you should find down the bottom of your screen a very easy Q&A to start popping some questions in. Now, if your question is specific to an individual business, we may take it offline, but we do commit to coming back to you with an answer. I'd like to now introduce our panel members. Firstly, we do have an apology from Professor Philip Taylor, Head of Management and Marketing at Federation Business School. Unfortunately, we've had some technical difficulties with Phil, so he's unable to join us this afternoon. Next, I'd like to welcome Dr. Soma Pillay, Senior Lecturer at Federation Business School. Welcome, Soma. Next, I'd like to welcome Ange Connor, Founder and Director at Inspire HQ. Welcome, Ange. And last but not least, Tim Walsh, Managing Director at JK Personnel. Welcome, Tim. Now, to get into our presentations initially, I'm going to ask Dr. Soma Pillay to run through a presentation. So welcome, Soma.
Thank you very much, Nick. There we go. Are we all able to see that? Can we see that?
We can see that just fine, Soma. Over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you again, and thanks to Nick as well for the introduction. There are many thoughts and scenarios shared on what the future looks like for organizations. This future scenario is what we refer to as the new normal. Some say that the focus on mental health and well-being may relax slightly given the recent easing on restrictions. I believe that mental health and well-being will remain a dominant challenge for some time yet. With the increased focus on returning to the workplace, you find that the new normal will offer opportunities for us to reflect on being future ready, to equip ourselves with the skills and confidence to tackle the challenges ahead, and to have the support of a very strong professional network. So now's the time to consider boundary breaking collaboration and innovative ways of working. In fact, futurists actually maintain that because of accelerated technological developments, social technologies will offer new perspectives on how we understand, how we relate, and how we connect to one another as well. In fact, right now, collaborative and teleworking technologies are connecting diverse workers around the world, and this will result in new work teams and new work styles as well. We also find that new forms of digital labor will facilitate virtual management and greater social intelligence. In fact, forecasters have speculated that we are heading towards what we call a care economy, where social intelligence becomes central to the roles that employees play. In the context of social technologies, we will have now more than ever more flexible work teams and a new set of interpersonal skills and intelligence as well. So the question then emerges or rises as to what exactly is social intelligence and how does one actually develop social intelligence? So social intelligence typically assesses how well we understand and interact with each other. Social intelligence also helps in team building. My all-time favorite is the Johari model, which is a very useful tool to build self-awareness and gain an understanding of how others perceive you. So if you're working in teams, which we all do on a regular basis, the Johari model or window is a particularly useful tool to help build our awareness and also our relationship with those that we work within our teams and groups. I think that a challenge for remote workers, however, will be in demonstrating and signaling their presence and also a sense of belonging within the group or the team. And for this, there are creative e-platforms to enhance a sense of presence with colleagues. So in crisis, it's interesting because in crisis the hardest things can be the softest things, if that makes sense. Currently there's a lot of pressure on managers and on leaders. In fact, resilient leaders and managers are those who are genuinely sincere, empathetic, walking compassionately in the shoes of their employees and their customers. Resilience can be built through mentorship or mentoring programs, team exercises, group assessments, and resilience training as well. So finally, an organization's purpose cultivates engaged employees. When companies are centered on authentic purpose, you find that employees feel that their work has meaning. In fact, there's enough evidence that shows that employees who feel a greater sense of connection can be relied on to help companies recover and grow when stability returns. Also, I find that purpose tends to attract loyal customers who will stick with you in a downturn. In fact, 8 in 10 consumers say that they're more loyal to purpose-driven brands, which can help sustain customer relationships in a downturn and beyond. So to conclude, my suggestion is to have a sense of understanding as to where your team and group is, as this aids in creating and sustaining effective teams. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Soma. If any of our attendees watching at the moment would like to start posting some questions for Soma, we'll tackle those after we've also run through a short presentation from both Tim and Ange. So thank you very much, Soma. Next, I'd like to welcome Ange Connor from Inspire HQ. Over to you, Ange.
Thank you, Nick, and I'll just share my screen, so hopefully that's all good for everyone there. So for those of you who might not be so familiar with Inspire HQ, we exist to build great workplaces. And I guess never has it been more difficult for us as business owners and managers to keep our workplaces great. Productivity, morale, engagement and motivation are by far our biggest people challenges right now. We're operating in a changing environment, which means that we need to change and adapt the way we manage our people as well. And so I'm sure many of you have experienced having to let people go, stand them down, reduce their working hours and move team members to either working remotely or not at all. And now with restrictions easing, we're starting to see that move back to transitioning our team members back into the workforce. And again, the goalposts continue to change for us. So the challenge in that is that how do we keep our team members productive? How do we maintain that morale and that great culture that we had pre-COVID-19? But how do we also support our team members' mental health? So we've gone from having to be CEOs, Chief Executive Officers, to now needing to be Chief Energy Officers. And so if you're feeling a little bit exhausted, it's no wonder. A recent global study from Harvard Business School found that 40% of employees surveyed said that they'd not been asked by their employer at all since the pandemic started how they were actually doing. So my question for you is, if your team were surveyed, what would the results be? What would they have to say? Your team members will have been experiencing heightened stress and anxiety levels. That uncertainty is set to continue even though restrictions are easing. Plus, we now have the fatigue setting in. So that fatigue from operating with increased stress and anxiety and uncertainty for the last couple of months. And so if you thought it was just time to be able to start breathing again, our goalposts are changing, and again, we need to adapt and pivot. So as we start to look at that transition, some of our team members will be keen to transition back to work and others will be resistant. Juggling kids returning to school will be a challenge. Parents are going to be faced with looking after their kids when they get sick. No longer can you send your kids to school with that runny nose. So they'll need to take more leave, and this creates more stress and anxiety. So what does that mean for your workplace? What can you be doing now to prepare your team members for that? Others will be apprehensive about hygiene standards and social distancing in the workplace. So again, it's important to think about what are we putting in place and how are we communicating that to our team members. If we really want to keep our team productive and maintain our morale, we need to listen to our employees more than ever. Asking the right questions of them is critical, and it needs to be more than that chat over the phone. We need to eyeball them. We need to observe their body language and their energy or their lack thereof. We need to listen to their tone and the way they're responding. And if you know your team members well, you'll be able to observe and make an assessment on how they're doing. If you don't know your team members so well, there's never been a better time to get to know them. So to give you the best chance of engaging your team members and keeping productivity up and maintaining morale, here are some questions that you might like to ask your team members. What are the things that you're dealing with in your home environment? Knowing what your team is juggling or struggling with means that you can help support them. We need to keep asking this question because it will change over the coming weeks and months. What do you love to do outside of work, or tell me about yourself? This is a good one if you don't know your team members well. This question is all about getting to know what your team members love so that you can ask them in future conversations about how they've been creating time to do what they love. And when we talk about what we love to do, we instantly feel happier and more positive. What are you struggling with? Again, this is a good question to ask regularly. It will change. What makes you feel supported? Every one of our team members is different and they need to be managed in different ways. Knowing how you can support each of your team members will help you know how to adjust your management style to suit their needs. How do you like to communicate? Well, you might love nothing more than picking up the phone and having a conversation. your team member might not be the same. They might prefer a different method of communication. So it's important to find a balance here of what works for you and what works for them so that they can maintain that productivity and morale. How are you looking after yourself or practicing self-care? This is our opportunity to ensure all our team members are being proactive about looking after themselves. And by asking this question as managers, we can gather information so that we're best positioned to support the mental health of our team members. And finally, what do you need and want from work in the post-COVID-19 new normal? It's time for us to reimagine our workplaces. Knowing what's important to your team members will be highly valuable for you as you start to design your workplace of the future. So now that you've got the great questions to ask, it's time to ask them and stop talking. We need to be human and really listen to what our team members are saying if we're serious about maintaining productivity, morale, and engagement in our workplaces. So if you're participating in today's session with your team, maybe at the conclusion of the session, it would be a great time to start the conversations and ask these questions. Good luck.
Thank you, Ange. That was absolutely terrific, and some fantastic questions to keep in that toolkit for helping to deal with and work with your employees. Nextly, we will hand it over to Tim Walsh from JK Personnel to run us through our final short presentation, and then we will swing right into some Q&A. I can see the questions coming through from some of the viewers now, which is absolutely terrific. So over to you, Tim.
Thanks, Nick. Just give me a moment while I quickly share a screen with you all. I just wanted to keep it relatively straightforward today. Just sort of highlighting a few things that I think are really important. I'm a big believer in the importance of employee engagement. I think it's critical to basic things like, and Anne just touched on some of it around motivation and productivity, and also retention of staff and dependability of staff, and probably more now than ever, given the difficulty of the circumstances that some businesses and some of our employees have faced over the last couple of months. I define employee engagement as, in a simple way, as being how invested, committed, motivated and engaged an employee is with their role, and also with the success of the business that they work for or with. It's easy to understand why in times like this, unpredictable or unique or challenging, whatever adjective you want to use to describe the last couple of months, but it's understandable how during these sorts of, or the last few months, how employee engagement has potentially become less of a focus. It does sort of fall into more that strategic bucket as opposed to the operational. And I think so many businesses over the last couple of months that have been struggling or moving through challenging circumstances around profitability and possibly just looking for opportunity to survive, have become really operationally focused, looking 1 day ahead or 1 week ahead or 1 month ahead, because the medium to long-term future has been is so uncertain. It's important to I suppose retain a focus on things like employee engagement. The fundamentals of establishing good engagement are still very relevant and applicable even today, and even more so in some instances. So the dot points I just wanted to go through briefly there on that slide on your screen. The first one, which I think is really important when it comes to employee engagement, and something that we try to do with our team, is around empowerment through trust. So really taking the opportunity to trust your employees to do their job. Research does suggest that is one of the biggest factors when it comes to how engaged an employee is, that they feel like their employer or their manager trusts them to be able to execute the duties associated with their role. And the reason I think that's particularly applicable at the moment is with the rise of people working remotely or working from home. We're almost forced into an environment at the moment where we need to trust our staff more, because we don't have the usual working environment in place. People are working, at a larger distance or online or whatever, and it's a really good opportunity for employers and managers that maybe don't naturally trust or provide that sort of opportunity for employees. That now's a really good time to be able to do that. The next point is just around the importance of each contribution. So a massive factor when it comes to employee engagement is how significant they feel their contribution is to the business, so that they feel like the effort they make each day to come into work actually has a significant impact on outcomes for the business and for their role. And at the moment, there would be employees and there would be businesses where people are coming in each day and perhaps feeling like their contribution isn't as significant as it normally is, because there's so many factors outside the business determining whether it's succeeding or failing. And for an employee to remain sort of motivated and feel like they're making that contribution in when so many things are outside their control is a unique sort of set of circumstances. So I think it's really important as leaders, as managers, as employers, that we look for new ways to acknowledge the contributions that our employees are making, and they may well be making contributions outside their normal role, and that sort of leads into that next point around celebrating success. There might be new definitions of what success looks like for each person within your business, but make sure you find that the avenue there to communicate and celebrate not only amongst individuals but amongst the team with whatever their contribution may well be on a daily basis. The next point there, just around celebrating each other, is referring to many of those points that Ange raised really well about the whole person, and that the stuff she was mentioning there about communicating with staff is so important, but also celebrating some of the personal achievements over the last couple of months that employees have been overcoming. And the homeschooling one's just such a brilliant example. We all know some of the parents out there that have been working through, particularly the primary school age children, while also juggling work commitments, have been significantly challenging. And as a business and as a team, celebrate those parents that have been able to succeed through that, and are now able to send their kids back off to school and start to focus perhaps more on or more clearly on the day-to-day of their role without that distraction. And the last point I really just wanted to talk around was career development opportunities. A massive factor when it comes to how engaged an employee is how invested they feel that their employer is around the development of their career and their opportunities to learn new things and have a career pathway, if you like. And again, in times like this, it's really easy to forget that or not focus on it because we're worried about short-term survival in some cases. But any opportunity for a staff member to learn something different or to do something outside their normal role is a chance to develop. So I think as managers, just framing that differently when you're working with employees, any chance that they have to do something they haven't done previously is a chance for them to learn something different and add another string to their bow, and make sure that we're talking about it through that lens around the ongoing development of them as an individual. And the only other thing I'd just say to finish up, Nick, is just that there's no one size fits all, that every employee is different, every employer is different, and find opportunities to engage with your staff that suit you and your business and your style.
Terrific stuff, Tim, and thank you very much for running us through that. We've had three terrific and very varied short presentations from each of you, which I hope's given a little bit of a taste of your experience and your thoughts to provoke a few questions from our viewers. Before I start going through those questions from the viewers, I'm going to throw one in from myself, and this one, Ange, to just put you on the spot as first cab off the rank. As part of your Game Changer 3 questions, you talked about the dangerous conversation point of what things are you dealing with at home. It's quite a confronting question, or the response you can get from a question like that can be quite confronting. As an example, you could get a serious response which may relate to an example of domestic violence or severe financial hardship that may be occurring at home. That probably starts to cross the employee-employer boundaries and relationship. you have some tips or some guidance that you could provide to an employer who may end up getting a response like that, that may not have the ability to access an EAP type program?
Yeah, sure, Nick, no problem at all. And really great question, because it's something that my team get asked all the time. And I think it's why sometimes as leaders and managers, we hesitate to ask that question, because we're scared or apprehensive about what the response might be. And then, do we have the answer? What do we do with that? So sometimes it's easier not to ask the question at all, is what I find happens. But I would certainly encourage managers to be brave and ask that question of their employees. And it's not necessarily about having the answer there on the spot. It's about listening and talking through how you can support them. And you don't have to have that answer then and there. You can take that time to go away and bring the conversation back together a little while later, or the next day, depending on the urgency of the issue. And there's a lot of companies that don't have EAP programs, but there's EAP services available on an ad hoc basis as well. And there's lots of providers here across Ballarat. So I know Jodie's organised in the past at a HR industry chat to hear from Mind Life Clinic. They've got some fantastic psychology services. There's Ballarat Community Health, there's Child and Family Services. And so our role as managers is to ask the question and then help provide or provide some information or guidance to that employee. We don't have to solve their problem for them. But then once we ask that question, it's important that we keep checking in with them and making sure that they are getting the support that they need. And so it can be just about pointing them in the right direction, where those resources are, and what do they need to support them in the work environment. So depending on what it is, it might be a conversation around flexible working hours or reduced working hours, or they might want more hours so that they're not focused so much on some of their challenges at home. So it's about facilitating that conversation and then navigating the way forward, but we don't have to have all the answers.
Terrific stuff, Ange. Got a question here for Tim. We've got a viewer who said they really appreciate the emphasis on employee engagement as a critical strategic focus. But Tim, what are the key actions and behaviours that business leaders can do to demonstrate or extend trust to their people?
I think one of the big things for me is almost you need to provide them enough room to not only succeed on their own feet, but also the opportunity to fail. Be there as be aware of what work they're up, check in on a regular basis, have structure in place around sort of in this climate where you're not working in the same office. It might be a daily check-in where you catch up on what tasks the person is working on, which gives you an opportunity to be aware of any things they may be particularly struggling with that might be the opportunity or the potential for you to perhaps offer some support, but trying not to just tell them what to do or give them all the answers, and more take on that coaching approach and encourage them to come to some solutions and work through those problems themselves, and then giving them the space to make those decisions and saying to your staff, I trust your judgment. You work through the problem, and if you've weighed everything and you've worked through our processes, done it the way we like to do it, I trust your judgment. And if it doesn't go the way it's meant to go, then we'll learn from it, and we'll look at a better way to do it next time. But I think you need to have the structure of checking in on a regular basis so that you know when the time is for you to intervene. But you do need to let go a little bit and allow them the freedom to make decisions, and some of those will be successful and they'll learn from those, but there will be times when they'll make decisions or choose a course of action that doesn't end up providing the ideal result, which is a great opportunity for them to learn as well.
Terrific stuff. Thanks, Tim. We've got an example of and this is probably not a too uncommon example from some sectors. We have an employer who stood down half of their team, and there seems to now be a divide developing between those that are stood down at home and those that are working. Is there any tips or advice on how some of those employers can try and manage that? And feel free for any of the panelists to jump out there and provide some insight.
I'm happy to share some thoughts, Nick, on that. And again, this is something that isn't uncommon from the business owners and managers that we're talking to, is certainly that divide. And I think having a real focus on the team as a whole and looking at how you're still engaging those team members that have been stood down. So however you can look at bringing them together, or mixing up smaller teams or cross-functional teams where some have been stood down and some haven't, is just bringing them together and allowing them to communicate, not even necessarily about work, but just interact together so that they can still bond as a team as a whole. What we've found is that with the stood down employees, maybe there potentially hasn't been as much communication there, or it's been very separate. We've had one lot of communication with those stood down employees, and then another lot of communication with the ones that are still in the workforce or working remotely. But we need to bring them all together, and whether that can be done through Zoom or through social functions, or just here at Inspire HQ, we've had daily check-ins where everybody just jumps on at a certain time, and it's not compulsory, but if you're available, it's expected that you'll be there. And, you know, sometimes we talk a bit about what's happening at work. We celebrate the success of, you know, what's happened that week, or we celebrate the success of some individuals. And that's where, again, knowing your employees individually is really important, so that you can celebrate that person individually, even if they've been stood down and aren't doing any work at the moment, but you can still involve them and make them feel like they're part of the team.
Thanks, Ange, and some really good insights. Another question here asking, what tips do the panel have for how employers can maintain the momentum forced on us by COVID? How do we continue to develop the new normal other than reverting back to the old normal? And I think that's a really good question. So would one of our panelists like to jump in and give a response there?
I'm happy to do that, Nick. I made reference in my discussion about the new normal, and that it's a new way of working, and the expectations that are now required of us as part of this new normal. And I think to answer that question, what we need to do and what's going to be a challenge from here onwards is to have ongoing conversations about what future ready implies for us. And again, that would differ from industry to industry or organization to organization. But essentially, it requires us to start thinking or rethinking on our skills development, our confidence levels as well, to embrace new technologies which we otherwise didn't feel comfortable doing. And I also indicated to consider boundary breaking innovation as well. So that's my suggestion.
Thanks, Soma. Question for Tim. Tim, you talked about the empowerment of employees through trust, but thinking about going back the other way, in some cases, employers have made some significant changes to their employees' normal duties and what they were pre-COVID, being their working hours changing, working environments have changed during the crisis. It's fair to say that some employees have started to lose a bit of trust with their employers because of some of the decisions that they've been forced to make For one reason or another. How can an employer go about starting to rebuild some of that trust into the future?
Yeah, it's a good question, and obviously really relevant. And I can certainly empathise with the employees out there that have felt that the rug's been pulled from beneath them a touch. And as managers and as employers, rebuilding the trust in that relationship is, I think it really just comes back to trying to be as transparent as we can, as often as we can. The risk with being transparent in this environment at the moment is the landscape seems to shift at times every 24 hours, particularly early on. I certainly felt that was the case myself. I think as soon as we have clarity about what the immediate future looks like and the impact that it's going to have on our business and therefore the employee's role, that is communicated really clearly to employees, and remembering that different people take on information in different ways. So, taking the time to have a chat to an employee directly face to face about, how upcoming changes may well impact their role, but then reinforcing that in writing in detail. Some employees will really want to take that away in detail and spend time reading through it and come back with questions, and really have an open communication. That it's, it's not that, once every 2 weeks we're going to do an all staff address and that's the only source of information. The old adage of the open door policy is probably more important now than ever, and doing that with empathy. I can't remember who spoke earlier about the importance of empathy as a manager, but right now having an empathy and an understanding of the challenges your employees are going through. So sharing that information as soon as you do have it, and keeping that communication open throughout, I think it can go or at least start to repair some of that trust that may have been eroded through the earlier stages of the unpredictability of the situation, sort of back late March, early April.
Thanks, Tim. Some really good tips. Soma, your discussion and one of your slides did touch on empathy, which is what Tim was referencing then, as part of that resilient leadership style. It really is driven by empathy and compassion towards employees. Is there still not a need at times, and in particular in some certain industries and environments, for more of a hard-lined, I guess, traditional autocratic style leadership approach? Is there still a necessity to dial that in at times?
Interesting question, Nick. I think that while autocratic leadership is one of the least popular management styles, it's also actually quite famous, especially in military and in assembly line manufacturing and such. My thoughts are that the culture and the goals of an organization determine which is the best leadership style that fits the organization. An appropriate leadership style should essentially correlate with the industry and with the people, importantly as well. I think in the ideal world, Nick, managers should aspire for what we call responsible management, whatever that means in the context of that industry or organization.
I think that's a good response, but
it's a safe one.
It's a good safe response, and no doubt about it. That is a challenging question to try and consider where autocratic leadership styles, if they have a place in today's world. So well done on that one, Soma. Another question was to the panel. What happens if a manager is in different stages than his or her team? In forming, storming, etc. What happens if a manager's not aligned with their team's same stage throughout the process? And this is probably framed more around recovery.
If I may, I'm happy to respond to that question. That's an interesting question, and I think pivotal to the response would be the culture that the organization actually enjoys or lack thereof, should I say. I think that what's really important, especially currently, is to create a culture that is that revolves around transparency and trust and openness, and having that. I know that Tim and Angie alluded to that as well, having that sense of trust and that sense of belonging within within a group. So my suggestion then is to encourage for managers to feel encouraged to open communications and within the group, and also to find ways to continuously think around this concept of social intelligence. I can't highlight anymore how important it is, because now that we are all working virtually, it does present certain barriers or challenges, and that sense of presence or empathy may be compromised in the process. So managers, as I indicated, need to be resilient and need to be open and rethink about voice, about a sense of presence, and about creating an open culture as well, one that revolves around trust. So I also indicated in one of my slides that when employees are, when managers aspire towards a purpose-driven and authentic organization, it's almost, you know, given that employees would show loyalty and a greater sense of connection as well.
Thanks, Soma. I've got another question here where we've got an example of someone who's got an employee that's appearing quite okay, but really isn't performing that well working remotely. How or what are the suggestions on how this can be approached? In particular, the statement from this employer is they really can't afford to have anyone underperforming, and that's probably a very real question from many employers at this time. You know, they need all their employees working at 100%. How do you approach that difficult conversation where someone's really not keeping up to the task? Anyone want to jump into that one?
I don't mind just adding just a little bit, if I may. I think that just because we are working differently currently does not or should not discourage managers or even employees from feeling engaged with the performance management part of being managed. And I know that with the industry that I'm part of, performance management is ongoing, and 3 times in the year we engage with the process. I can't see why that should be any different. If anything at all, we should reinforce the importance of performance management, and even if it means picking up the phone and just asking how's things going, is there anything else that I can do to support you, skills development and such. I think that that should not be underestimated.
I think so, Soma. I'm actually going to just steal a little bit of content that Professor Philip Taylor was going to talk through today. And unfortunately, we did miss out on having Phil present, but he was going to talk about the challenges of a business making the difficult decision to rationalise their workforce, and how some of the difficult decisions are often and maybe inappropriately made around the age of the employee versus their capability or their value that they bring to the organisation overall. So maybe a question perhaps for Tim or for Ange, if in the scenario that a business is having to make that difficult decision to downsize or reduce a headcount, when trying to select or trying to choose the staff that aren't going to be able to continue with the business, you know, is the view around looking at those in the older demographic age group or is it looking at skill set? Is it looking at those who meet their KPIs or not? I know there's not a one size fits all, but we'd love to hear a few views on how best to try and tackle those scenarios.
I'm happy to have a crack at this one first. I'm sure Ange has probably got some suggestions as well. The first thing I would say, we often get, probably more so from candidates, that feel the frustration of ageism from the employment sector at times. And one of the things I'm always loath to highlight is that the average turnover or tenure of an employee in 2020 is not 15 to 20 years or even 10 years. You know, we're turning over our staff every 3, 4, 5 years, depending on sector. So to look at someone in there, say in their early 50s, mid 50s, or even 60s, and worry about how long they're going to work for you as an employee, well, the 23-year-old isn't going to work for you for less likely. It's unlikely the 23-year-old is going to work for you for 10 years anyway. So, you know, hire the most skilled person available for now, and there's a number of factors as to how long they're going to stay with you, and age is probably not in the top 10. As for I suppose, making those hard decisions in the current climate, I think there's times in business for to make decisions based off intuition and you know, go with your gut and all that sort of thing. I think when it comes to downsizing your workforce or taking someone's, you know, livelihood away, I think that's a time for reason and a time for logic and a time for sitting down and weighing up all the factors that go into who contributes what in their role, and unfortunately doing what's most commercially responsible for the business. And if you do it in that manner and do it in a systematic way, then again, age won't be on the list of factors if you go about it in the right way. It's if you're going through it in a flippant manner or making perhaps rash decisions that there's more chance of those less important factors playing a part in your decision making.
Some good insights there, Tim. Ange, it looks like you might have had something you want to add to that conversation as well. So over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. I think regardless of whether it's age or experience or whatever it might be, when we're in this situation and we have to look at reducing our workforce, the most important thing I think to do is look at our workforce plan. And so a lot of business owners will have spent the last couple of months looking at their business plan, at their budget, at their financials. But what we often forget to do is look at our people plan. And so I think when we step back and add that workforce plan, people plan into all of those other plans and budgets and that kind of thing that we've got, the decision making can become, as Tim said, you know, logical, it makes sense, and really looking at what's the work that we need to deliver now, what tasks need to be performed, what skill sets do we need to perform those tasks, and what do we think is going to happen in the future. We don't know, and the goalposts are changing by the day, by the week. But if we do our workforce plan on best case scenario and we do our workforce plan on worst case scenario, but we hope for the best, we basically have a roadmap of how we need to navigate our workforce over the coming weeks and months. And then when it does come to having to have a conversation with someone and letting them go, it's very factual. It's evidence-based, it's not personal, it's not about whether you're young or old, experienced or not experienced, whether you were the last one on and you were the first one off. It's about the needs of the business, and we take the emotion out of it by approaching it in that way.
I couldn't agree more with those comments. Soma, is there anything you wanted to add before we look to start wrapping up this session today?
Not at this stage. Thanks, Nick.
No worries. Well, thank you very much to our panelists, to Tim, to Ange, to Soma. Thank you for joining us today. And of course, thank you to all the viewers that have tuned in. We've had a really good response. It's been absolutely terrific. So there might be a couple of questions there that we weren't able to answer live. So we'll endeavour to get back to anyone and answer those questions for them. We are looking forward now to hearing from Jason Cunningham this afternoon. So if you haven't registered to join the next session with Jason, head across to the Commerce Ballarat website now, and you'll be able to quickly register and jump in. And we do look forward to seeing more of you for our networking session at 4 o'clock Friday afternoon. So thanks once again to all our panellists, and that'll finish us up for today. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.